Okay. We should be live on YouTube at this point if Brian wants to start the meeting.
We hereby call the committee of the whole meeting of July 17th to order. Roll call the members.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo.
She's muted right now. Can somebody unmute her?
I did.
I'm unmuted. I think it was on purpose. Here,
Mr. D'Ambrosio,
Yes.
Mr. Ferranti,
Yeah,
Ms. Gravellisi,
Here.
Mr. Sinella,
Here.
Ms. Ty,
Here.
Mayor Arrigo.
he's muted.
Here. All right, we have 2 items on the agenda today. Dr. Kelly, do you want to start with the first item?
Sure. So I had sent you some information on the 2 grants that we're applying for. The first is the ESSER grant, which is an entitlement grant through the federal government for just about $2.2 million. And a related grant is coming from Federal CARES Act funding for technology. That is not an entitlement grant. It is a competitive grant. But the grant description indicates that it is targeted for gateway cities and cities that have high poverty levels like Revere. So I'm fairly confident in our ability to secure the funding that we're requesting through that grant. So I'm going to start with that one first because it's a very simple grant. It's for technology to help ensure that students are able to learn as the COVID pandemic continues. It is a matching grant, which means any funds we request through that grant, we have to match with our own dollars. And I did confirm with the Department of Education that we can use our ESSER funds to make that match. So talking to Jonathan Ferrara and principals about our technology needs and what they might cost, there were 3 main areas that we wanted to target in terms of technology. The first was more Chromebooks so that we can ensure a one-to-one program for all students and staff as soon as we can get materials on hand. The second item we wanted to secure was a number of hotspots that we could distribute to families in the event that Verizon ends its free internet access program, which we anticipate could happen around November or December, but we might still not be in a full learning mode at that point. And the third item is more digital cameras so that teachers can project their own work and work that students do in a classroom while still maintaining social distancing, but making sure that all kids can see what they're writing and what they're doing. So that is a big key piece where the 2 grants coincide because we estimated the total cost of those items at about $1.2 million. And so applying for half of that through the technology grant and including the other half in the ESSER grant would enable us to meet those pieces. I'll add that we're also taking into consideration, as I had mentioned to you all over email, the effort that KISS 108 is making to provide Chromebooks to students is incorporated into that. And that's another program that we are going to be a prime partner for, which is why I was able to be on the Maddie in the Morning show the other day. So the idea that we're going to get some materials through that program is incorporated into this planning process as well.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
And see if there are any questions about the technology piece of it.
Any
Yeah.
members, any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ferranti.
Yeah, Diane, on the Chromebooks, how many do you think that we're going to need?
We're aiming for 6,000 total.
6,000? Okay, then for the hotspots for the Comcast, how many houses do you think we have to include in that?
So we did collect data from families in our family survey about who has access to technology and who anticipates they might need help from us in the future. And only about 12 people said they did, but our survey obviously didn't capture every single family. And one of the concerns we have with our survey was that in particular, families who might not have strong technology or internet capability might be the ones who didn't reply to the survey because it was electronic. So we're estimating about 60 to 70. And the hotspots is one idea. They're relatively expensive because you have to purchase them, and then there's also a monthly fee for them. We're working with Jonathan Ferrara is actually taking the lead on this to work with Verizon and see if instead we can, on behalf of families, purchase their $10 a month low impact technology package that usually families have to buy on their own. So we're going to write it into the grant that it's not necessarily hotspot, but it's acquiring internet access for families through the school district. So that would actually be a cheaper avenue for us. You know, as always, we're exploring all possibilities, but we anticipate that we might have 50 to 70 families who would need some kind of help with their internet access.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Diane,
Yep.
there are people in Revere that do not have access to cable.
I don't know that they don't have access to it, Fred, as much as they can't afford to purchase the access.
Okay, but we're talking two different things. You're saying that these hotspots, that they can't get it. So you're saying now is that they can get it, but they can't pay for it.
So the way a hotspot works is it allows people remotely to access our internet in the district. So if we buy them a hotspot, they can get internet access through our networks. But
Can
they
they
have
also
to
get,
have because they wouldn't be hardwired into our network, they would need the hotspot in order to access it. That's one way to get them internet access. Another way to get them access, as I was saying, would be to kind of purchase the internet for them, to purchase them a Verizon account where Verizon would come in and set up their internet access, and we would pay the $10 monthly fee for that.
okay, but I'm a little puzzled. If these people requested Verizon to come in and set them up for cable, for TV, for HBO and everything, would Verizon come in and do that? I just find it hard to believe that they don't have cable. They don't have movies. They don't have.
They might have cable, Fred, but that's a different fee than internet. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know if they have cable or not. We didn't ask them that question.
Okay. Well, that's a concern I have is because, and I'm assuming, and I'm the layperson here, is that if they have cable, then they have access to internet.
That's not the case. They would have to purchase that separately.
But what about the new, maybe through you to Brian, the new company that's in Revere? I don't know if it's DCR, RCD.
RCN.
Do they have the capability of having cable? I mean, of having
So they provide the internet. They're an internet provider as well, and it's I don't know their packages off the top of my head, but they have a variety of packages that are available. So what we're talking about, Dr. Kelly, is providing internet access to families that may not otherwise be able to afford internet access.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. It's not just giving it out randomly. It's not just giving it to everybody or, anything of that nature. That's why we feel like it's a very limited number, maybe 50 to 70 families who legitimately cannot otherwise get internet access.
Well, my concern is that cable started in mountainous areas where, unlike radio waves, TV wave, internet doesn't bend. So in this day and age, in a metropolis like Revere, that there's no access on a person's own, I find that very hard to believe. Okay, I rest. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Sinella, I just, and that's why I asked Diane the question, because I think you may be, I don't know if you're understanding that it's the people can, they may be people that can get access to the internet. They don't have the package because they're not paying for it. They may be in circumstances that don't allow them to pay for it at this point, right? Because internet is up to, I think it's, anywhere between $30 and $50 a month. And so that may be a cost that some families cannot take on. So while they may be wired to get the internet, they're not able to get it because of financial reasons. And so I think Dr. Kelly's talking about an opportunity for us to try to get those families access to the internet that are not getting it because of financial reasons. Right? And
Okay, that's a different story than what I'm hearing. I mean, because I think that when last we went around like this here, there were 7 or 8 families that couldn't afford it or that were canceled because of non-payment. We picked that up and the children had access to it. But that went from 7 or 8 now up to the possibility of 70. And that's what parents have to have some responsibility too here. If they're paying $100 for a
They
carton of
don't have enough
cigarettes.
money.
Also, Fred, excuse
Yep.
me, Fred, you don't necessarily have to get the internet through cable. You can also get it through Verizon through the
Right.
phone. You know what I mean? So some people can't afford that additional, whether you're getting it through your phone or you're getting it through Comcast, it's still an additional $30 to $40 added to your bill that you choose to add on, which is an expense for a lot of people.
Oh, okay, thank you.
any other members?
Stacy.
Mrs. Rizzo.
Yeah, just wanted to add that, Fred, where it might cost us $30 to $50 as an add-on for Verizon, this is just a basic internet that they offer to low-income families for $10. No frills, just the basic. As far as RCN, I know I did look up and do some work because there's a family that has RCN, but they didn't have a $10 one yet. So I don't know, that was 6 months ago, but as of December, they didn't have any kind of package deal. And really, Verizon for $10 was, I thought, really a good price.
Right. Mhm.
Mr. D'Ambrosio.
Yeah, thank you. No, I wanted to thank the superintendent and our office for taking the lead on this, because in a time of massive recession, there are going to be plenty of families, unfortunately, who are probably unable to set their home situations up with the internet. And it's obviously crucial for kids being able to get into the curriculum right now.
Thank you, Ms. Francie. I'm Mr. D'Ambrosio. Mrs.
I have one
Francie.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Diane, is this a 1-year subscription or is it multiple years that we're trying to do for them?
So right now it would be 1 year and we can, see where we are at the end of the 2021 school year.
Okay,
We just want to make
Thank you.
sure everybody's set for next school year.
okay.
Mhm.
Any other members?
No, I'd just like to add something that sometimes it's hard to believe the level of poverty that is out there. But I know the Beachmont Improvement Committee had an appeal from a Beachmont student who did not have a bed or a mattress, and that's what he wanted. And that level of poverty is sometimes shocking to the rest of us. So I think anything we can do to help people who are experiencing that level of poverty is a win-win for all of us.
Okay.
So
Dr.
other aspects of the ESSA grant, there are parameters around the grant, and one of them is providing technology. The grant in general is intended to remediate the impact that COVID has had on students, and making sure that they have access and equity to a quality education regardless of the circumstances that they live in. So one of the pieces, as I just mentioned, a big chunk of the money we're hoping to spend through that grant is on the technology piece. But there are other pieces that we're considering as we try to think of how we can ensure that we have a quality educational system in the coming school year. And pieces of that are around making sure that we can connect with families in ways that the family feels welcomed and included, and that we can really engage with them effectively. So, and I have to apologize because of the issue with the internet and email. I don't have the exact pieces written down in front of me that I sent to you that we were hoping to spend this grant on. But a few of the other items that I wanted to talk about, one was a request, a relatively small request from Mr. Mogavero that he needs additional funds to complement the Title III grants to ensure that he can test the number of anticipated new English learner students who will enter the district over the summer and in the fall. And he felt he was about $8,000 or $9,000 short in what he needed to ensure we could afford that testing. And so we put about it might have been $11,000 into the grant to pay for that testing. And again, that's not an amount that's anticipated to cover all of the testing needs, but it will supplement the amount that he was able to allocate through Title III. And I saw Mrs. Gravellisi had a hand up, so.
Mhm.
Question on that, Susan?
Ms. Gravellisi.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, I have that printed out, like I didn't know if you said you weren't able to access the rest of what you had sent to us.
Oh,
If you want me to read it down the line, each item, the one that you were just speaking of, the EL testing for incoming students, you had 11,000 allotted.
Okay.
I don't know if you want me to read them and you can discuss them.
Yeah, do you want to read them one by one and I can talk about them as you read them?
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
Okay, so the ESSA grant entitlement, the first one, which we already discussed, was matching funds for the RLT grant for $600,000 for technology needs. The second bullet point was funds for 24 weeks PPE for all schools. Carl estimated 300,000.
Yeah, so I can, let me speak to that for just a minute. The Department of Education actually gave us a tool that we could use to estimate how much PPE we needed in terms of masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, disinfectant. And it's based on the number of students and the number of adults. So we submitted the 300,000 that we submitted there will cover for 12 weeks if we had full return of all students and staff. Now, honestly, and this is going to be the second part of our meeting, is to talk about reopening plans and what we're thinking about. And, you know, we're still working on all of that, but I can tell you that we don't anticipate that we'll have full return. Right now, we're anticipating we might have a little less than half return. So we still ordered a quantity that would actually take us through 24 weeks, which would get us just a little more than halfway through the school year. And we wanted to over order now, anticipating that even if we are able to fully return at some point, we would have enough on hand to get us through the beginning of that. And if we need to make another order in November or December, we would have ample time to anticipate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mrs. Rizzo, I know you had your hand up earlier while Ms. Gravellisi was going through the bullets of what we're discussing, but did you want to weigh in?
No, I was just going to add to the EL testing. I thought that number was very, very low, especially when our numbers rise. But so I'm glad that Mr. Malgavero asked for more, because I thought that number was low to begin with.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Franti.
Yeah, Diane, The bullet sheet says 24 weeks, but I thought you said 12.
Mhm.
Is it 24 on half or is it 12 on full, going back to school?
It's 24 on half. So
Okay.
it would get us through the first half of the year. The way the table was set up that the Department of Education gave us, it was set out for 12 weeks. So we filled it out as if we were going to have full capacity for 12 weeks, which will really cover us for half capacity at 24 weeks, if that makes sense.
All right, I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Mhm.
I got it.
Any other members have any comments on PPE?
No.
Okay. Ms. Gravellisi, do you want to go to the next bullet?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next bullet point was weekly sanitation of all schools for 24 weeks, 150,000.
Mhm. So we worked with our cleaning company, and Carl Svensson, actually, I have to thank him for working with the owner of that company to work out what we would need in order to do a deep clean sanitization once a week of every building. And it actually came out around 120,000, but we wanted to put some extra money there in case something occurred that we needed to quickly do an unanticipated cleaning of a building. So we put in the 150, anticipating that would give us a 25% cushion for what our needs might be. And again, we planned that out for a little over half the year so that we can reassess and see where we are later in the school year.
Any members have any questions?
Brian, just if I may, Brian,
Oh, Mrs. Gravellisi had her hand up, and then Mrs. Sinella, we'll go to you after.
okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Just a quick question, Diane, that weekly deep cleaning, what would that entail? Like, as far as, is it
It
one of
would-
those like sprays that they have now or, okay.
Yeah, it would be the spray sanitation that touches every surface. The same kind of sanitation that we did earlier in the spring. We had actually done 2 rounds of that before we closed the schools. And then once we closed the schools, we did it again. And we did it again after staff came in to retrieve their belongings. Staff and students were in the buildings a little bit. We did another deep cleaning then. So it's based off of that.
Thank you.
Mr. Sinella.
Thank you, Diane. This is a major cleaning at the end of once a week, once a month. What provisions are being made to, if we're back in school, cleanliness between constant use of the bathrooms, constant use of cafeteria, constant use of the buildings per se, and about the cooling systems and about an air intake? I mean, there's just so many things that just the surface cleaning don't get to.
Mhm.
Has this been included?
So I'll start with the bathrooms and that stuff that you mentioned. We're still going to have our regular cleaning service every single day, every night. Every building will be cleaned as they are right now. Supplies and materials will be restocked. We did put in an allowance for additional soap and paper towels because we know those will be used more frequently as we encourage kids to wash their hands and take hand washing breaks during the day. So we've allowed for that in our purchasing. In terms of the air filters, we did work with Amoresco and change all of the air filters in all of the univents over the summer. I am going to be working with Carl to have them go through and really consider our air handling needs and make sure that they're up to par for what the experts are requesting. So that might be something that we have to take another look at, but we feel like we have enough funding in our Amoresco contract that would allow us to make any changes that we need to make. Most of our buildings, as you know, are new, and so they're less of a concern that there might be a problem there. Our older buildings, like the Lincoln, the Beachmont, the high school, and the Garfield, we need to take a closer look at. And so there might be some issues associated with air handling in those buildings that we would want to remediate.
One more, where is the air conditioning status of the Lincoln School? Is that going to be finished?
Not before school starts.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But I will say that despite the fact that the Lincoln School does not have air conditioning, it does have an air handling system that regulates and changes the air inside the building using fresh air from outside on a regular basis, as all of our buildings do.
Thank you.
So,
Any other members? Okay, Ms. Scarpelisi, you want to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next bullet point, additional transportation costs, 350,000.
so we're not quite sure where we are with transportation right now. We did a survey of parents, and I have pictures of these on my phone. Let me just see here. There was a large percentage of parents who right now told us that they would not want transportation for their children. We're going to have to, in August at some point, really have people commit to whether or not they want transportation. So just anticipating that we might have to put on a second round of runs, particularly from North Riviera and the Point of Pines. We wanted to allocate funding for that. We're not quite sure how much of that we're going to need to use. Let's see if I can find this. I think I'm on the wrong. Bear with me, sorry. The technology issues have completely upset my apple cart today. Okay, here it is. So 51% of parents said that they would provide their own transportation. 20% said kids would bike to school or walk to school. There's another category that I can't quite read that 18% said, and 11% said that they would want our transportation department, they would use the school bus to get back and forth from school. So that's a low number. I want to caution again that we had responses from the parents of 3,240 students, which is a little bit less than half of our student population. So we're not sure that it would be an exact extrapolation to say that roughly double that number would actually want transportation. And again, we did put the caveat on these surveys that this was not written in stone, that we know that people's plans might change as we learn more about what's happening with COVID and as we progress through the summer. So around the second week in August, we would want to put out a notice to families like, this is your chance. Tell us now if you want school transportation. If you say no, it's not going to be provided 6 weeks from now if you change your mind. Once we do that, we're going to have a much clearer idea on exactly what we're going to need for any additional transportation. And you know, if it comes back that really a huge number of people are requesting transportation, at that point I would come to the school committee and suggest that we reconsider our transportation policies, because right now we do provide a lot of transportation that we're not required to provide. And so if it comes out that right now we spend roughly $8 million on our transportation, and that's budgeted through our regular school funding. This additional 300,000 will give us a little bit of a cushion. I'll note that the majority of that $8 million is for outside special education transportation. And so our inside transportation is a much smaller portion of that cost. So although $300,000 sounds like a very small amount compared to our total transportation budget, compared to our in-district transportation budget, it's a significant figure. And it will give us a lot of flexibility. But again, it's a little bit unclear at this point in time exactly how much of that we're going to need. And I will highlight again that there will be opportunities to reconsider how we provide transportation and to whom we provide transportation if the need be.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mrs. Rizzo.
But my hand was tired. I know this would not be popular in our district, but I know many districts are sticking to within the 2-mile radius. There will not be transportation, whether it's elementary or any other grade level. I do realize middle school, I think we're kind of forced into doing busing because it is a lottery. So we're telling people, you know, they have to travel to these schools for the most part. And high school, it just doesn't have to be. Especially where our high school is in the middle of the city and there is public transportation from every area in Revere that can get to that position. So those are things I think we might need to think of. Again, like it's not it won't be popular for the most part, but when push comes to shove, we need to make cuts somewhere.
Thank you, Mrs. Rizzo. Mr. Sinella.
Thank you, Brian. Diane, I applaud you for even making reference that if people say they don't want it, and then they come back and they say they want it. I don't buy that. I mean, we'll cave in like a house of cards. And I think that your guesstimate of the cost, if the state is requiring no more than 8 on a bus, and we put 60 to 70 now, you're talking a 7-fold increase in transportation. If half of them want that, you're talking a 3.5-fold of increase. So your transportation budget is way out of line. So I agree with what Ms. Rizzo made reference to with different communities, how they handle it. I just hope that when time comes for us to do it, that we'll stand our guns and do it. I would guesstimate that probably 75% of our transportation is gratis for the citizenry, that we don't have to provide it. But I would take careful note of transportation costs because they're going to skyrocket.
Yeah,
Thank
and I can just tell you that we're expecting guidance on transportation from the Department of Education next week. But what I'm hearing is that they're going to allow, the number is going to be somewhere between 25 and 45 kids on a bus. And I believe the discussion they're having right now is whether it needs to be 1 student per seat, or particularly with the smaller elementary kids, if it could be 1 student on one side and 2 students on the seat across, and then reverse that for the next row. So that the overall, there would not be a lot of kids in proximity to each other, but we'll have to wait and see what the state comes out with. We are definitely making educated guesses. They are guesses, and they are subject to change as more information comes from the state and more guidance comes from our medical professionals.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Ms. Ty.
Well, I was going to say, you know, we don't have any of the details about what the state will allow or demand that we do. But one commitment I think that we have made and that we are committed to perhaps forever is the middle school, because it is a lottery. I agree with Mrs. Rizzo on that. It is a lottery. We talked about that from the very beginning when we had the schools open, that they would be bused, that parents would not be responsible for getting them there. And I think we have to be absolutely committed to that statement and to the practice that we have had ever since the beginning. For the rest, I think it will be interesting. I too worry about how much money we will be spending on transportation, but I think we need to wait and see. And of course, I'm hoping for more money from the state for that.
Good luck with that one.
With a transportation bill.
Good luck.
Thank you, Ms. Ty. Mrs. Gravellisi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Diane, with, you know, the stricter guidelines on the regular buses back and forth to school, whether whichever way they alternate the students, will we now have monitors for each bus to make sure that, everybody's in the right place where we don't normally have it for the regular ed buses?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that we've been talking about in the district office. As you know, we are currently without a transportation director, but we did conduct interviews for that position last week, and we'll be hopefully having an announcement soon on that. But that's definitely something that we were talking about, just having another pair of eyes. The driver obviously needs to be focused on the road and on the driving, and not focused on what kids are doing. And as we all know, adolescents and young kids sometimes forget themselves on the school bus. And that's definitely something that we want to look at, is making sure that there's a monitor on each bus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Sinella, and then we'll get to
Yes.
you, Mr. Francie.
Thank you. Diane, a question is, we haven't entered into a contract with a bus company yet. How much time do you need in order to do this? I mean, here we are, the middle of July. School, if we start, the end of August, the first week in September, where does that put us? I mean, I don't want to see us contracting for 50 buses if we're not going to use them. And then we have to negotiate to see if we're going to get 25% back. So
Yeah.
where does that stand?
Right, and so we're gonna have to work that out we're under contract with Haley Bus right now. And we have other vendors that we work with through, smaller companies that do individual runs and pieces like that. So we'll have to work on that, Fred, and I'm in agreement with you that we don't want to rush into contracts that we are not sure that we need, but at the same time, we need to make some decisions and move forward. Like all of these things that we're talking about, with the ESSER grant, with both of these grants, we can't purchase any of these items until the grants are approved. Like I have to get them submitted so that DESI can approve them so that we can actually spend this money. And the first grant that we talked about is actually due by Tuesday. So my plan this afternoon is to, hopefully you'll all give me some approval, at least for that $600,000, so I can get that grant submitted. The ESSA grant is not due until the second week in August. But again, I need to get that submitted so we can actually order the PPE items that we're talking about, so that we can start talking about contracts with transportation companies and all of those other pieces we can't do until we have that money secured. So
Yeah.
time is definitely of the essence. I do think that there has been some relaxation, and we can work with the mayor's office and the procurement office to have a quick turnaround on RFPs if we need to go out to bid on an additional transportation contract. And we can work with the city solicitor around expanding existing contacts to avoid having to go through a full procurement process if that is allowed under the relaxed guidelines caused by COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a similar kind of exercise with CARES Act money that the city's received in terms of looking at additional cleaning for city buildings and purchasing PPE, and we kind of using either state contracts or kind of the expedited procurement process, and we'll continue to collaborate and make sure that we do that with anything related to obviously the safety of children in our school district. So yeah, every avenue that we can use to be able to expedite things, we're in the process. Mr. Ferranti, I know you had your.
Yeah, I do. A question to Diane. Diane, if for some reason we can't get a new contract with either Haley or somebody else, what would happen in September? I'm just saying the worst case scenario, obviously.
I guess the worst case scenario would be that we would have no transportation, but
Mhm.
we do have a contract with Haley right now for the same level of transportation services that we provided in the past. So we're okay with our regular routine stuff. You know, I think to Fred's point is if it turns out that we can't come back in September, which I don't think is the case, I'm really hoping and working hard with our reopening teams to put in a plan that we can come back. You know, the question is going to be, have we allocated enough funding if we have to do additional runs during the day so that we can get everybody to school safely without overcrowding on our buses? And, you know, that's going to become a place where we might have to appeal to our families to not request transportation if they don't really need it. And also where we might have to, as, you know, Carol and Stacy have articulated, outside of the middle school, really think about whether or not we need to provide transportation for our high school students and, you know, other places where we're not required to provide it.
Yeah, but I think that, you know, with the next contract would be specified how many runs and this, that, wherever, where they go. And so I think you would have a better idea when we enter into a new contract. If it gets to that point, you'll know exactly what you're going to spend. Where here it's a little bit of a, you know, a guess of what's going on, obviously, depending on how many kids are going back and forth.
Mhm.
But I just think that, you know, that has to be obviously part of our discussion to get done as soon as we can.
Yeah,
See,
and
the
I
state
can
makes
tell you
it
that
difficult.
transportation is one of the most ambiguous pieces of this because we haven't received the state guidelines yet. And, you know, once we do, we'll be able to inform families and really get a sense of commitment from the families on who needs transportation and who doesn't.
All right, thank you.
Any other members have any questions or comments? Okay, Mrs. Gravellisi?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, next bullet point, nurses, office assistants to triage students if they arrive more than one at a time,
Mhm.
220,000.
Mhm. So this is, you know, similar to the bus monitor suggestion that you made, Susan. Nurses are in a similar state where they're pretty much alone in their office. And if a kid comes down and is presenting perhaps with COVID symptoms or something else, and they're trying to triage that, and other kids come down behind, it's going to be really hard for them to monitor and maintain and control that. And, you know, in talking to the nurses, we thought that having a second pair of hands and eyes there to help them would alleviate that pressure and stress, because they might be saying to a child, stay out, stay out, stay out, because I'm dealing with this child who maybe I think has COVID. And maybe that child that they're saying, stay out, stay out, stay out to might be presenting similarly. And really you want to get them in and get them taken care of. So just having somebody else, and hopefully it would be somebody with a little bit of a medical background. We're not saying that they would be another nurse, but somebody who could work maybe as like a nurse's aide and has some experience and the right temperament and the right, you know, ideology that could really help each of those nurses make sure things are okay in the office.
Great idea. Mhm.
Mrs. Rizzo?
Yes, bring back those health technicians. I'll go back.
Yes,
Um,
that's
but I
just what I
will-
was thinking about.
Yeah, what I will say too is there are many times if a teacher wanted you to come to a room to check on a student, you go up to the room, you check on the student, and next thing you know, even though you might shut your lights off and close the door, you open up the door when you get back to your office and there's like 4 kids sitting there waiting for you. So there needs to be a second set of eyes and hands on hand, I think. We don't need 5 students sitting in an office that no one knows about. So I think that would be very helpful.
Any other members?
No, I'm in full agreement.
Mrs. Gravellisi, you want to continue?
Okay, staff to assist special populations. The first one, Diane, was PT parent/engagement liaison at each school for 220,000.
Mhm. So this is a position that we had talked about earlier in the year when we were talking about the Student Opportunity Act funding, which again is another piece of ambiguity that we have going on this year. We don't know how much, if any, of that money we're going to see. I did mention to you earlier that we have been told by the commissioner that we do have to submit our plans, which implies that we are going to get at least some of that money. However, it was one of the pieces that they put into the ESSER grant and said that so that schools could make sure they have good communication with families and stay well connected, we could actually pay for parent liaisons at each school through this ESSER grant. And so I wanted to put that in there so that we could have a person in each building who can work with the principal on more of a parent level, which to some of our parents who don't necessarily feel welcomed or able to engage, somebody who can reach out to them and work with them and kind of be an emissary between the school and families that are difficult to engage with. And maybe can explain things to parents on a level that they'd be more receptive to than hearing from a school administrator or somebody else. So this allocation was for a part-time position in each of the 11 schools that would be filled by a parent of students in that school. And hopefully has some language capabilities that are aligned with the families in that school and can help make sure that when we are in remote learning mode or in a hybrid mode, they can reach out to families of students who aren't connecting the way that we need them to make sure they're going to be academically successful.
Okay. Any, Mrs. Rizzo, sorry.
Yeah, I think in this case, I really would like to see maybe a detailed job description. You know, it kind of, I don't know, it just seems almost like, do we need them all the time? So we're going to employ people that we might need all the time. I think maybe if there was a finer, detailed job description, I would feel more
honestly, Stacey,
comfortable.
that's something that's going to take time that we do not have. I have got to get these grants submitted. They're part-time positions, so they're not going to be there all the time. We could definitely write something up that meets the parameters that you're talking about, like make it be a 2-day-a-week thing as opposed to a 4 hours every day or a certain number of days a month. Like we can definitely work on those parameters together before we do any kind of hiring. But I am going to need you guys to up or down these grants so that I can get them submitted, because the other aspects of the grants we have to move on, if that makes sense. So if ideologically people agree with these positions, then we can move forward with them and nail down a job description and what hours we want them to work with you guys, work with principals, and figure out what's going to be best for each individual school. And put those criteria there, but I have to beg the committee to not hold up the grant application because we just don't have time, unfortunately.
And I'm just going to say at this point, I do think we're going to have some SOA money coming in.
I do too.
But I think it's going to make it much more difficult next year. I think next year is going to be a bigger struggle than this year. And now we're talking bodies that we have to employ. And you know us, once we have people on board,
Don't leave.
some people don't want them to go. They'll say, we have to think of our own, Carol. So I just get nervous about things like this. You know, again, yes, to work on a job description down the road, I have no problem with that. I do want to see a kind of fine tune. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Ty.
Well, as always, the devil is in the details.
Mhm.
And we simply don't have time for the details. I understand that. And we don't have to keep them on board all the time. But I think it's a wonderful position to have. I think it will make it much easier for parents who sometimes feel a little bit intimidated by administrators and by teachers to have someone on that level there. It's, I mean, it's not a full-time job. It's only a part-time position. I hope we're going to be able to find people to fill this position, good qualified
Mhm.
people. And so I have no problem at all in okaying it and letting the details come out later. And I promise, Stacy, we'll.
You won't.
Oh no, I wasn't going to promise that I would ever change my mind.
Thank you, Ms. Ty. Mrs. Gravellisi?
I think it's a great idea. Honestly, in my opinion, similar to paraprofessionals when they were all hired way back in, what was it, the late 80s when we
Right.
started putting paraprofessionals
Mhm.
in the schools, and that was new at that time and an unknown. And, you know, it was again, just a part-time, 4 hours a day.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think it's something that would be very useful in the schools. So I'm not opposed to that.
Any other members? One comment I do have on the these positions would be, and I know Dr. Kelly will put an emphasis on this, but I think that finding individuals who can really connect with the families is important.
Right.
Cultural competency is really important. You know, language ability. So I know that all those are the details that I think we're interested in, and I know that Dr. Kelly, you're on the same page in terms of that of what those kind of qualifications are.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
Well said.
Great. Okay, Mrs. Gravellisi, continue.
Okay, moving on. Full-time EL guidance / engagement counselor at RHS for 60,000.
Mhm. So one of the areas where we recognize, looking at the data from student participation in the fall, where we have a significant gap is with the engagement of our high school aged English learner students. And we think that a big piece of that resulted from in our remote learning environment, students were able to work a lot more than when they were physically coming to school. And that resulted in, because a lot of places where they worked, like supermarkets and places like that, needed additional people to do additional hours. They were frequently being enticed by their employer to work full time. And many of them also had the need to work full time in order to make the money that their families needed at home. Often they have, for example, a parent who may have worked in a restaurant who no longer was working because the restaurants were closed. So there's a lot of complication around this, but what we wanted to do is try to hire somebody who could work particularly with our English learner students at the high school in a role, in a guidance role, but served a dual purpose of a more traditional guidance counselor and along the lines of what Tiffany Curry does with the internships in the early college piece, and really work with our English learner high school students to engage them more and try to find, as Tiffany does for students in general, some paid internships so that the students are making the money that they need, but staying connected to the school, and really reaching out and engaging them and helping thwart the pieces of their life that are pulling them away from school altogether. So that was the intention there. And to think about what this position would be, it would be kind of a cross between what Tiffany does and what Heidi Cushing does, working with the English learner students and keeping them engaged.
Hmm.
We do have over 300 English learner students at the high school, so it's a significant population. And and there'd be a significant number of students that this individual, if we can find the right person, would be able to help.
Mrs. Rizzo?
So I will say, when we have spoken to students of color, they've expressed that they don't feel they get the guidance, perhaps that the other students get. But I have to say, also, the other students have expressed it at their student council meetings and also at the health and wellness, that they feel that they don't get enough from guidance. They want to have more of a relationship with their guidance counselors, and they don't feel it. And those are the top students. So even with this piece, if we could kind of evaluate what's going on, because, for the most part, doesn't matter what color, our students feel that there needs to be a little more give and take in the guidance area. And I mean, it's not to, Tiffany does extremely great work and the students work well with her. So I can't pinpoint her. I just think it's the whole department to look at. Maybe there's some other way that we can start forming relationships with the students, not just the ones that come seeking for the information, but sometimes we have to go out and grab those kids that don't come or don't know what's going to be offered.
Mhm. Okay, I can definitely relay that back to Diana Finn. I know that one of the challenges that we have historically is that the typical student guidance counselor ratio is about 1 to 400. We've decreased that significantly at the high school. We're down to about 1 to 250. And we have hired 2 African-American guidance counselors in the last couple of years. So we're definitely hoping that we can find greater strength in relationships. We currently have 2 guidance counselors who speak Spanish. So we're not where we need to be. But I think that we've made strides in the last 4 years to increase the diversity of our guidance staff. Prior to 4 years ago, I think it was all white women with 1 white male guidance counselor. So we've definitely made some significant change in that area. But there is definitely still work to do. And I know all of our guidance counselors work very hard. But maybe there are ways that we can look at how the guidance department is structured and move a little bit away from the traditional business as usual in the guidance office, where we're working on college recommendations and college applications, and change that a little bit to make sure we're meeting what the students say their needs are, and not just what history tells us the job of the guidance counselor is. So I can definitely say that.
You said it perfectly. Because I do each and every one, all the new ones, they're excellent at what they do. I think we just need to reevaluate how we handle guidance. And you said it eloquently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rizzo. Ms. Ty, sorry.
That's okay. I just like to make an observation about this. I know that they work very hard. But what I have heard over and over again, particularly from minority students, is that they don't know what advanced classes might be available to them, and they don't know when they could do it, or that they haven't been allowed in the classes and so on. And I don't know the circumstances behind any of those complaints. And everything that I know about the guidance counselor is that I know that they work very hard. But if that perception is out there too, and I might not even have mentioned this in this particular venue, but since it's come up, I thought it would be appropriate, that maybe they need to rethink about how they make all of the options available to everyone, and that everyone knows all of the options that are available to them, because that really does seem to be widely observed that children of color, minority children, are not getting the information that they need.
Yeah, well, I agree, because even the task force that Blaine and Asha has started at the high school on the diversity piece, they have spoken about those students not knowing what courses they could be taken. And that is a piece they're going to be working on very hard to make sure they start realizing they can take AP courses, they can do this. So
Right.
I'm really glad that I saw that piece come up during one of their meetings.
And, you know, if I can just add to that, a lot of what we're talking about is built around equity and access to curriculum and to programming and to everything else. And in traditional schools, including our own, there is a lot of structural inequity that makes it difficult for kids to access honors level coursework. And some of what we've been doing in our work around equity for the last several years, and we've talked about this several times at school committee meetings, is focused around our grading practices and how we schedule students. And I'm going to say that for a long time, the Revere Public Schools has had a structural inequity when we look at honors classes versus non-honors classes and pre-AP at the middle school level and all of those different constructs that we have built and created that actually serve as gatekeepers to some kids and prevent them from getting access to the high quality, rigorous curriculum that they're capable of doing. And often these things start to happen as early as 3rd or 4th grade, where kids are pigeonholed into lower level classes and don't have access to the coursework that repeats itself all the way up through the high school level. And so one of the things that we're working on with our grading practices subcommittees is de-leveling. And I know this is going to be a challenge for a lot of people because I know there are a lot of people in the community and perhaps even members of the school committee who feel like we need to have honors and college level and these different pieces. And I would say that outside of the advanced placement track, there's significant evidence that shows that that just limits students, because when we say that this over here is the honors section and this over here is the college section or the standard section, we did away with it a long time ago, but even just differentiating honors from college sends a signal to the kids and it sends a signal to the teachers that the instruction should be different in those two classes. And that means that the student who's in the college level class never has the opportunity, is not even presented with the chance to really think deeply and think critically about some advanced concepts. And it doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to do that. It just means they're not presented with the opportunity. So one of the pieces that we're working on, and you're going to see this come through in our reentry plan, one of the things that you're going to see happen is because of the way we have to do scheduling as we think about our reentry plan for next year, we're going to need to cohort students, which means the same group of kids is going to be together in their math class, their English class, their science class, and their elective class, whatever the elective might be. I'm thinking at the high school level for right now. And so what that means is that we don't have the opportunity to say to kids, well, you're really good at English, so you're going to be in honors English, but you struggle a little bit in math, so you're going to be in college math, and you're awesome at science, so we're going to put you in pre-AP, in AP science or whatever. So what we're looking at is, instead of having honors be something that you go into at the beginning of the year and you're either in or you're out, is going to a more unleveled program so that students take a course, like for example, geometry, and every student is taking the same geometry class. And for each unit of geometry, there will be advanced coursework offered that any student can choose to participate in or not. And if the students complete the advanced coursework for a majority of the units, and our teachers and administrators are still working out the exact specifics on this, but if a student successfully completes the advanced coursework for a certain number of units, then they will earn honors credit for that course. And it gives the kids some voice and choice in how they pursue their curriculum. And students who otherwise would have been in a college level class and never have the opportunity to take that advanced coursework can now try it. And if they do well in it, they might try it a few more times, and they might end up earning honors credit by the end of the course. And those kids who do great in that content area, no matter what, can always do the honors section of that unit and can always get the honors credit as well. It just opens the access to everybody instead of having it partitioned off to just a handful or a few students.
Great idea. Great idea. That's a wonderful way to deal with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know even when I was teaching that kids would not be allowed to move into my honors class. And it always seemed to me to be very unfair. So I think people should be able to move, and this plan will give everyone a chance to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ty. Any other members have any comments or questions? Oh, Mrs. Gravellisi, you want to continue?
The next bullet point was one we already touched on, that EL testing for incoming students for the $11,000. So were there any other questions on that before we move forward? No. Okay.
What was that?
One question.
Mr. Franti?
Yeah, Diana, how many incoming students do we really expect this year?
So the parents are in the parent survey, 85% of parents said that they intend to send their children back. And they indicated that their preferred model to start the school year was a hybrid with alternating weeks. So what that would look like is, if we can make everything align, the kids might be in that cohort I mentioned of 25 students, but only 12 of them would come in week A, and the other 13 would come in week B. And so, this is actually a strategy that we think is going to help kids learn as well, because each class will only have roughly half as many students as what they used to. So that's what we're looking at. Again, our teams of teachers and administrators and parents and students, we have 6 teams working right now. And they're figuring out what exactly the best model would be for the Revere Public Schools. So I don't want to say that we're committed to that week A, week B thing. We're not. We have to wait and see what comes back, what the input is from the teams that are working on that. But to answer your question, Michael, of the 3,200 students that we got responses on, 85% said they intend to send their kids back.
No, I mean, I really wasn't asking that one, Diana. It was just the one that we were going to allocate 11,000 for. It says EL testing for incoming students. How many students are we expecting for the EL testing?
I don't have that
Okay.
number. I can ask Mr. Mogavero. He did an analysis based on previous year entry, and it might be a little bit different this year. We're starting to do an analysis now of how many students have transferred out of the district since COVID started. We are hearing that some of our EL students have moved out of the country or away from Revere. But we're estimating our costs based on average intakes over the last several years. And so it might be a little bit less than that, but that's what we're using to base the numbers off of.
All right, thank you.
Mrs. Gravellisi?
Thank you. Since we switched topics and you were on the 85% that chose to return to school with the hybrid, for that other 15%, they'll have the opportunity for 100% remote learning from home?
Yeah, we're working on really 3 different models. And what we're thinking right now, and again, all of this is subject to change, but is that the majority of kids would come back in some kind of some kids in, some kids at home model on different days or different weeks. But we would have some kids, particularly our small learning group special needs students, and maybe some others who are at high risk because they didn't engage at all in the spring, who we would invite back on a full-time basis. So they would be in every day. And then we would have another population of students who maybe they have underlying health issues themselves, or their parents choose not to send them to school, who would be in a full remote model. And so we're trying to work on kind of 3 levels of plans, which kind of goes back to, how really insane this time is right now for us. But we're trying to to work on 3 different plans for all of those different modalities.
Thank you.
Any other members? Okay, Mrs. Gravellisi, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, district work on equity and inclusion. The first one was equity PD for staff/students, $7,000.
So that is obviously a very low cost, but
Mhm.
It's really low.
I know.
We need to go up.
As you know, we just hired a new principal at Seacoast, Dr. Stacy Mulligan, and Stacy has an extensive background in this work. And so one of the things that I asked her to do was commit to doing some training for staff. And she actually does a lot of work with students as well. So she's going to do some work with students. And much of the work that she does with us, it will be on time that she's already contracted and paid to provide through her principal contract. The $7,000 was so that we can pay her to do some work, perhaps on weekends or over vacations with students. And it's a minimal amount, but based on an hourly rate that she would be able to provide some additional work to us outside of her contract hours, because when she's a principal, she still needs to be a principal.
Mhm.
She'll be able to do some work with staff during professional development time, which is typically a time that we don't have kids. However, that would be time that's already covered in her contract. And this $7,000 would just be work that she would do outside of her contractual hours.
Sounds like a bargain.
Mrs. Rizzo, then Mr. Sinella.
Just because you brought up Stacy, I had 3 members from Medford contact me, very irate about stealing her and how she was one of the most valued people they do have there. And I said, now you kind of see how we feel with Peabody. So all right. I said, the district's got to do what a district has to do. So I am glad, and I look forward to meeting her and seeing why they are so jealous right about now.
Mr. Sinella?
Yes, thank you. To the superintendent, this salary will not count towards pension, will it?
Correct. This is a separate stipended amount.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Well, I certainly hope she's not within 3 years of retiring anyway.
That's some time to go.
Any other members? No. Mrs. Gravellisi, you want to continue on?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next bullet point was Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Inclusion to coordinate equity work and oversee parent liaisons, $160,000.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, the grant is targeted at making sure that we have the technology, the PPE, and equity in our reopening and everything that we do in the district. And this, again, is a position that we had talked about earlier in the year. Again, we were thinking of funding it through the Student Opportunity Act funding, which is a little bit ambiguous right now. But it is a piece that would qualify under this grant. And creating this position would enable us to have a full-time superintendent level position that would focus all of the work, both the work that Stacy's going to do with teachers and administrators and students, and the work engaging our parent liaisons to make sure that they're well trained and can do the work of engaging the families that we want them to do. This position would also oversee our translators that we currently have in the district and work with district teams, principals, and central office, ensuring that our meetings and things are accessible through multiple languages, do the work around restructuring that we talked about for grading and access to advanced level coursework. All of those pieces would fall under this position. One thing I'll say about having this be at the assistant superintendent level is that it makes sure this position is at a level that there is oversight over principals in all of the buildings. And it indicates to the community, to students, to staff, to everybody that we feel this work is incredibly serious by creating an assistant superintendent level position. We talked a lot about it in January, so I don't know if you want me to reiterate all of that now, but I guess I'll stop there and see what the questions are.
Mrs. Rizzo.
I just have a question prior to probably more questions, but we had mentioned at the last meeting that someone from the Harvard would be doing an equity audit. Is that still in place?
That is not still in place, and I actually had that on the agenda to share with you Tuesday at the committee of the whole meeting. The person who was going to do that work for us has opted out of her practicum. I guess I will share her personal details of why, but so that is not in place. We are still working through the 5DP on grants to get equity audits in each of the 5 districts. So that's still in the works, but that's not definitive right now either.
But I thought like Malden already did an audit, and I believe Everett might be doing something now.
No, they're both partnering with us to try to have the equity audits completed. So they may have done some things in the past, but John O'Terry and Priya have both signed on to the grant to try to get the equity audits in.
So with this grant, would it be possible to apply for an equity audit? It's like $30,000.
I know. We could. And I could put it in there. I could put that, as you know, there was a certain amount of money, I forget what it was, Susan, that was not allocated for yet in this grant. But that is something that we could do there. And then even if we get the grants through the 5-district partnership, we could certainly reallocate the $30,000. We are allowed to allocate funding and then move it within 10% of a line item in the grant. So,
I mean,
for example,
I would like to see someone with a clear set of eyes on where we can improve, where we're doing awesome at, and to make, any kind of suggestions to us on what we need to do. I think it's really important, and I would like to see it in this grant.
Okay, and if others are in favor, I can certainly do that, add that in.
That's fine.
Well, before we move on to that, I mean, and that's certainly fine with me. Mr. Mayor, sorry, I didn't
Ms. Travelisi, sorry, I'm on my iPhone, so I apologize.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just gonna add 2 things. One, that remainder that you had talked about was 203,386. So obviously.
Wait a minute. Are we beyond the?
No, we're not.
Are we beyond the?
We're not,
assistant
no.
Superintendent?
No,
Okay,
we're not.
thank you. Then I'm
Diane,
sorry for interrupting.
Diane didn't have her paper, so I wanted to let her know what the remainder was. But
Okay.
back to what we were talking about with the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Inclusion. Now, I know you, Diane, I think it was in April, did you start the equity task force at the high school or the Equity Advisory Committee? And
Yep.
That committee has been working since the start of all this on equity and inclusion, correct?
They have,
And that committee would report to this assistant superintendent
correct.
with their findings and for guidelines and, meetings and so on.
Yes, and this assistant superintendent would also help expand those equity teams to the middle school level. We need them in all schools, but we want to really have somebody who can coordinate the work.
Oh, right. Now, how many members are on the equity team that you started at the high school? Just curious.
I don't know. I've been on a couple of Zooms with them, and there are like 30 students and teachers who typically engage in that. I know that Stacy and Anthony have both been on a couple of those meetings, so I don't know if either of them want to speak about it.
That's great.
I just want to add that I did submit a resolution on the diversity resolution that we passed last month. Thank you, everyone. I was so proud of that. And Blaine took it, and so she's going to see we would be able to help them as a school committee. and things that they might be looking at as professional development or curriculum, or I should say curriculum that is beyond the curriculum required by the state. So they're looking through all that and said that she'd bring up something at the next meeting. So it was very robust conversations. Everyone had some good comments, and everyone really kind of looks at it that we do have improvements that we need to look at. And I think Asha and Blaine have done tremendous work. Tremendous work.
Thank you, Mrs. Rizzo. Mr. D'Ambrosio?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, no, the high school equity team has done tremendous work. I've been lucky to sit on a few calls with them, as well as have a lot of additional calls with Asha, Blaine, and others. And, it's my strong feeling that we'll have a longer discussion about this on Tuesday because of the two motions that are currently up on the agenda. But I think it is our responsibility at this point to sort of bolster the work of that team and formalize it in certain ways that we'll discuss on Tuesday. And to bring it back to the agenda item, this assistant super position is just, I think, probably crucial in helping to tie together all of these simultaneously occurring good lines that are happening in good sort of areas of progress, but we're going to need some oversight. So I'm strongly in favor.
Thank you, Mr. D'Ambrosio. Any other, Ms. Chai?
Okay. I too am strongly in favor of having this position. Now, I remember in my old union days, anytime the school committee wanted to add an administrative position, we always objected, thinking that it was top heavy. But I certainly, in the period of time that we've been here, understand that there is an importance to a leadership position, which will indicate our deep commitment to equity. Unfortunately, the attitude in the city now, and with some of the things that have gone on in various parts of the city and in the government, indicate to some of our minority communities that there are people who feel that their needs are not as important as others' needs. I think having a position on this level indicates to the community that we are totally committed to an equity for all. I do think this is a time, not only in our city and our state, but certainly in our country. It is a time for change. It is a commitment when you see so many people out there working toward it, and a recognition that in the past we have not been fair to certain populations. I could go into that in greater detail, but I'm not going to. From a position that I held too as superintendent, let me just say that if you put someone in who is not at the level of assistant superintendent, then that person does not have the ability to, and I won't say order, but to convince people at levels of principal, assistant principal, directorships, and so forth, of what should be done in order for us to achieve equity. If somebody is in that position, and I view it in a way that you view a human rights position, Mr. Mayor, that you view a human resources position, I view it as that it is one person who has that power to say, this is what we're going to do. And of course, we'll be operating under the superintendent and by extension, under the policies of the school committee. So I am very much in favor of this position. And I think that we should fund it.
Thank you, Ms. Chai. Any other members? Mr. Franzi?
Yes. I'm not against the position, but I think that the audit would tell us what we have to do and not do. I think right now, hiring another assistant superintendent is not the thing that we should do. I mean, a title's a title. It doesn't matter if it's assistant superintendent, a director, a coordinator, whoever you hire, is going to have to do the job. I just think that right now, with the way things are going on, with potential budget cuts, to hire assistant superintendent right now, I'm not sure that's the right way to go. Like I said, I'm for the position. I just think we should rename the position, my opinion.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mr. Francie. Mr. Sinella? then
Correct me,
Mr.
Diane, this is part, we're applying for a grant. We're not making positions, because if the grant money's not available, then this
We
is
don't
all
have
pie
it.
in the sky. Or are we
No.
committing to creating these positions?
This is an entitlement grant, so this money is here and is ours, and we can spend it this way. We're encouraged to spend it around work on PPE, technology, and equity. So those are the three categories that we can spend money in. So we are encouraged by the Department of Education to spend the money this way. Now, I acknowledge that funding is very unstable right now, and we don't know what our Chapter 70 money is. But we know, and Stacy, I think that you can attest to this, that the state is pushing strongly for school departments to have the money they need to do this work. And we know that the Student Opportunity Act is enacted currently over 7 years to be implemented. And we don't know that this year it's going to be fully implemented at 17%, but we have no reason to think that it won't be next year. So these items that are in here we were originally planning to spend, and we had agreed to spend through the Student Opportunity Act. So it's not money that we think is going to go away, and we have no idea how we're ever going to pay for this in the future. It's money that the state is asking us to spend in a way that's going to help our kids and our families. And we do have good information that we will be able to cover these costs in the future going forward.
Well, but the grant is only for 1 year. Then we have to assume the cost of these positions after this.
Through which we would do through our
Yes,
Student Opportunity Act funding.
Okay,
What
then,
funding? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Student Opportunity Act.
Okay, thank you.
well, and then I'm in accord with Mr. Ferranti, wherein as I honestly don't feel the position should be an assistant superintendent. And with the school system the size that we are and the financial restraints that we're having, to have a superintendent and 3 assistant superintendents is not going to play well with the community. I mean, and I disagree with Ms. Ty. I mean, respect comes from the person that's doing it, but it also comes from the superintendent saying to the subordinates, this person is going to act as my liaison. You do what is requested of you. And if not, you have to answer to me. So again, I think the purpose of the position is well-founded, but I honestly don't feel it should be an assistant superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sinella. Any other members? Oh, Mrs. Rizzo, sorry.
Diane, when the Student Opportunity Act, wasn't it down as a director? Or
No.
was it under a superintendent?
Yep.
Okay. I mean, again, I look at it both ways. To me, what is a title? Like Fred said, as a director, if the superintendent's given guidance on whose job is what and who's to act on those requests, that's one thing. And then I don't have a problem with the title. I do
Excellent.
have a,
So you'll vote yes.
no, don't stop. But, no. And I absolutely want someone in this position. I absolutely think there is a real need, if not 10 years ago, especially now, for this position. And yes, it is a position that other districts have really looked into, and I know of maybe 24 have done it as a director. But again, a title to me doesn't mean anything. We're still spending the money, whether they're under a director are under assistant superintendent, is what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
So I think, oh, where was I going with this? Again, you know, like, I know we need it. I think if it's going to be done, I mean, obviously, this has to be submitted. I would have loved to see an equity audit prior to all this, but this has to be submitted. I also believe in order to fill this position, no matter which way the title is, we need to look at people very carefully out there for this position. I mean, it has to be advertised well. We need someone that's going to be able to fill this and fill it properly.
So a couple of things, and I'm gonna sound a little bit snippy here, so I apologize for that in advance, but
Oh,
I
go
do
for
want to
it.
remind you that in January, I gave you all a table of districts that had, that were our size or smaller, that had assistant superintendents of equity and inclusion. So I've demonstrated to you that this is not a unique thing. This is not something that a district the size of Revere should not have. It's something that's actually quite typical. And even the number of assistant superintendents going to 3 is quite typical for a district the size of Revere. Now, I know that's different. I know that there were days before when 1 assistant superintendent was unusual. But times have changed, and the requirements put on school districts around accountability and meeting the needs of all of our constituents have changed as well. And so we would not be unique in having, as a school district with 8,000 students, in having 3 assistant superintendents, or in having an assistant superintendent of equity and accountability. So I did give you that data when we talked about this, which is why you all approved this back at the beginning of the year, when we were anticipating that we would make this decision using funding from Student Opportunity Act. All I'm asking you to do today is to allow me to spend funding from a different funding source in order to get this position in and going now, because we desperately need it in light of COVID. And in regard to a worldwide search, I don't know that that is necessary. I
I'm
feel
not
like,
saying world. I'm not saying wide world. I mean, come on.
but I feel like
I
we have
mean-
people in districts that would be very good in this position. And as it is my purview
I know.
to do hiring, I don't want to be limited by restrictions on that. I'm going to put that out there. In terms of what a title means, I understand what you're saying about, I can say to people, this person is in charge and this person is going to tell you what to do. But the people that I have access to talk to, like teachers and administrators, are not our only constituents. And parents and community members and business owners and students won't understand the level of import that we put on this position if there isn't the title of assistant superintendent. And I'm not going to have the routine access to talk to those people just regularly in order to impart that. Well, I've empowered him. I've told everybody else that they have to listen to her, you know, whatever the case may be. I'm not going to be having that dialogue with everybody. Giving this title, and especially where it's a similar amount of money, it's not going to be any different really if we said director or if we said assistant superintendent. But saying assistant superintendent means that everybody who visits our website and sees what our leadership structure looks like, and everybody who wants to know a little bit about our district, who has no relation to us whatsoever, and every parent or child who says, I've got a problem, who am I going to talk to? Who's the equity person I can talk to? Is going to see the level of input that you as a school committee and I as a superintendent place on this position by giving it a title that symbolizes that import. And I do think that titles are symbols, no matter what, whether you're talking about the President of the United States or the Superintendent of Schools or a Vice Chair of the School Committee, like all of those things have meaning. And I want to make sure that this position is going to have the meaning that it should have, that is going to give our students and our parents and people who have no relationship to us whatsoever understand what our district is all about.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Ty?
Well, amen. In the real world, I know that, I understand, Stacy, what you're saying about, she can just say that, Diane can just say, well, no, you have to obey these people. It's not a question that they would be disrespectful, but principals have so many things on their minds and so many things to do, that to have someone above them who can help them in this area of their problems, to have someone that people can call, that they can feel comfortable with. And the message that gets out there, this is so important to us that I agree with Diane. It is surely a symbol of how dedicated we are to it. And that's why I feel so strongly about it. Number one, to give the person the power, the prestige, as it were, to deal with these important issues. And number two, from a practical point of view, so that he or she would have the power to do what needs to be done.
So Carol, I have to say, I live in the real world also, and I am out and about in all the districts. And like I expressed earlier, I truly believe that it is very valuable that we have a position of this caliber in our community. And we will make a commitment to this community, and we owe that commitment to this community, no matter what the title is. So I am living in the real world.
Thank you,
Well,
Mrs.
maybe when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about my experience as superintendent. And what happens there is that everybody wants to go to the superintendent. Everyone, no, who can I speak to? Who's higher? But they will take an assistant superintendent. And that's really why I think that we need somebody in that position to take care of these. When ACLU calls and says, listen, we have a complaint, we have someone who is dedicated on a very important level to dealing with the problem as it is presented to us.
Thank you, Ms. Ty. Mr. D'Ambrosio, you have your hand raised.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I too live in the real world, I think, as everybody else does. I just feel so I need to preface this comment by saying that. That being said, titles not only imply commitment, they imply a sort of permanence that is absolutely necessary to apply at a time like this. In the past and historically, we have sort of treated, and when I say we, I mean, various jurisdictions within the United States have treated equity issues as sort of passing issues. They have not been treated with the nature and level of permanence which they deserve. A title and position of this magnitude not only implies commitment, it implies long-term commitment that's here to stay even, after the energy associated with the chaotic summer that we've had has long passed. So the symbolic significance here is absolutely crucial. Others have said we are making a long-term commitment to examine these issues thoroughly in the city, and also understanding that that commitment is necessary to have in the long term. It's not going to sort of be rendered unnecessary anytime soon. So I'll stop speaking now, but that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. D'Ambrosio. Any other members? Okay. Ms. Gravellisi, do you want to continue on with our item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The last bullet point was the remainder, that $203,386 that we had mentioned earlier. And under that, you have $10,000 for each principal and director for COVID-related expenses.
Yeah, so one of the thoughts was to just give a little bit more funding to each school and to each director so that they can react to any particular curriculum or instructional or professional development need that they encounter or are planning to have as they return to school. So just give them a little bit of discretionary budgeting. But I could certainly work the equity audit into that funding and then, you know, prorate those amounts of money that we would give to each school for discretionary
Mhm.
spending.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Ferranti.
Yeah, Diane, what would be COVID-related costs? Is it like 100,000 versus the money given to the principal? I'm not sure what the related cost would be.
So that's how that is what we were thinking, that we would use that extra unallocated for. It was just an idea I had.
Okay.
So I wanted to talk to all of you and see if there were other things like the equity audit that we could incorporate. And then whatever funding is left, I just wanted to make available to principals. Like there might be one principal who, I don't know, needs to purchase some extra desks because they want to have one more classroom that's going to allow them to more effectively social distance the students, or,
Okay,
you know, each school is going to have those unique pieces that I want to give the principals and the directors the authority to determine on their own.
that's fine. No problem. Okay, thank you.
Any other members? Okay.
And
Miss-
that was everything on that,
Last one.
the ESSER and RLTA grant.
Okay.
RLTA.
Is I guess this is a procedural question. Is there a roll call vote required for all of them, or for each one? How, you know, what's the
Um,
I'll make a motion to support the items given to us by the superintendent to be sent off for the grant, or any other further words anyone wants to add.
That was just. fine.
Second,
Okay. Roll call.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo,
Yes.
Mr. D'Ambrosio. I gotta unmute him. Hold on, sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Ferranti,
Yes,
Ms. Gravellisi,
Yes,
Mr. Sinella,
Yes,
Ms. Ty,
yes,
Mayor Arrigo.
Yes.
Thank you
So-
all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. And we'll move on to the second item, which is reopening.
Okay. I'm gonna try my email one more time to see if Jonathan might have gotten that running. And it does not look like he did. All right, so I'm gonna try to summarize without my notes. We have 6 teams, as you all know, of teachers, administrators. Each team has a couple of parents and at least one student on it, who are working on different aspects of our reopening plan. We have a timeline mapped out. We did work with the 5DP to hire a plan coordinator. It was very short money. It was $2,000 per district. But that person is going to take the sets of notes from each of our 6 teams and convert them into a format so that our plan will be clear and each section will look similar to each other so that it's easier to follow. And the 5DP hired one consultant so that the consistencies among the 5 plans can be highlighted. And there are certain decisions that we have decided to prioritize together. One of them has been quite controversial in the media lately around whether students should be seated 3 feet apart or 6 feet apart or somewhere in between. And I know that the commissioner put out guidance that said it has to be a minimum of 3 feet. But a lot of the mixed guidance that we're getting, some of the experts are hedging on that. Others are saying it's no problem. They're talking about whether or not kids transmit the illness, all of these pieces that are very unclear. We have decided as a group, the 5-district partnership has decided as a group that we're going to stick with the 6 feet metric and just be overly cautious at this point for the health and safety of our students and our staff. So there are pieces like that that are going to be highlighted by having one writer. Our 6 teams all have at least 12, if not more members that are working on different aspects of the reopening plan. And they're going to submit their decisions by Wednesday, I think it is, July 22nd. And then our writer will have a week to make everything make sense and format everything. So we'll have a strong draft back by July 28th, which will be shared with you then. As Mrs. Rizzo pointed out, we do have to have a draft of our plan to the commissioner's office by Friday, July 31st. He did send us the template for that, and it's actually very simple. He's asking simple questions like, what mode do you anticipate you'll open in, meaning hybrid, fully remote, or fully in person? And there are a couple of other questions that he asked, but our actual plan is not due to him until August 10th, which I'm thrilled about because it gives us a little bit more time for public comment and review by the school committee, those pieces. So what we anticipate for a timeline, and again, I don't have this in front of me, so I don't have the exact dates, but I do know that we'll have the draft back from the writer on July 28th by midnight. You will get it shortly thereafter. The teams will get it back as well, and they will take a look to make sure that what the writer has written actually captures their true intent and that there aren't any pieces missing or misinterpreted. So they'll make corrections. And when those are finished by July 31st, I'll submit the draft to the commissioner's office, and we will also put the plan out for public comment. So there'll be a period, I believe it goes until August 4th, which is Tuesday, during which parents, students, teachers can comment on what they're seeing. When we get those comments back, the teams will reconvene to do a final edit. And it may be the case that, you know, something comes out in the public comment period that requires editing and changes, or it may not be the case. We know that whatever is written into the plan, some people will agree with and some people won't. We're not going to be able to come up with a plan that fits perfectly the needs of every individual who's part of our community, but we're going to do our best to make sure that it's cohesive and clear and accurate and well spelled out. And so that public comment will end, I think it's August 4th. The teams will have one more review period. I'm going to ask for a school committee meeting on, let me look at my calendar here. Actually, I think I set it up for the morning of August 10th so that you can actually vote the plan. You will have access to it and have been able to see it through all of those cycles as a reading and review period. And then if you could vote on it on the morning of August 10th, I would submit it to the commissioner's office in the afternoon of August 10th by the deadline.
Any members have any comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Franti?
Diane, when you submit this draft on the final thing on the 10th, how long will it come back for them to vote to okay it?
The commissioner has said there will be a quick turnaround.
What does that mean?
Exactly. I don't exactly know what it means, to be honest. But I do think that as long as we don't stray too far from the commissioner's guidance, which we don't intend to do, that we should be okay.
And one last question, it's a little bit off topic. Are we gonna have to adjust our calendar that we've already sent out there?
I think that we are going to have to adjust our calendar. You know, at the very least, and I know that we talked about this last month and you've already approved that we can capture those 4 extra student days that we typically have and use those for professional development for teachers. So we're going to have to adjust that. It's unfortunate because I know everybody wants answers yesterday and last week. and things are just so fluid, that we really,
Mhm.
we're just gonna have to move in a fluid sense. But I do think, Michael, thank you for bringing that up, that we are definitely gonna have to adjust the calendar for next year. And I think waiting a couple more weeks to see how things play out. I know that the mayor's office sent a release yesterday that they're getting worried about congregating and that there's actually an increase now in the number of positive cases from where we had been a week ago. Brian, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but all of these things can impact our plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Kelly, to your point about fluidity, we did, we're tracking all the information that we get every day. And one thing that was alarming was that the rate of new cases that we were seeing among certain demographics, which we track, showed that the 20 to 39-year-old demographic, which had usually made up about 30 to 35% of our cases, actually jumped up a little bit to 50% over the last month. And so looking at that, knowing that we're starting to see a little bit of a uptick in new cases, we think that's attributable to July 4th. And I think a lot of this is just based on the fact that people are being less vigilant. They're not wearing masks as much as they were. And we know that people are congregating. There's a real concern about what that looks like. And if we continue to see an uptick in cases and new cases, we may have to make some adjustments and start to think about some of the guidelines and the regulations that we put in place. So I guess with all that said, it is such a fluid situation that, if we are in a situation where there's, an increase in cases, or we see a spike, or we see a second wave hit, we're going to have to think long and hard about everything that we're doing. So, and that's a difficult message to communicate to a large number of people, but it's important, at a minimum, that we continue to be vigilant, and that we're all looking at this data and this information and kind of being as flexible and fluid as possible. And Mrs. Rizzo,
Nope, sorry.
it looked like you were ready to say something. Any?
I was, because I emailed someone else by accident.
Any other members have any comments or? Dr. Kelly, I think in terms of the reopening, I know I've talked to other mayors and administrators throughout the Commonwealth, and I know the nearly impossible task that's ahead. But I think that knowing what you've put in place and the work that's being done is again head and shoulders above what I know other people are going through. So I have supreme confidence that that we're going to have a plan that will have the health and welfare of our children, of our teachers, our administrators, and everybody in the city as a top priority. So I want to thank you for your work. I know it's been really difficult, and the guidelines and the guidance and the changing and the fluidity of it all is really difficult. And I commend your work on that, and everyone that's worked on it.
Thank you. Our teachers and staff have really done a great job contributing. So I want to just highlight that. And just a couple more things that I'll mention. I had hoped to share with you today the results of our staff survey and our parent survey, but our technical problems with the email and the school department server being down has prevented that. I'll have those for you on Tuesday. But just briefly, the results show that the vast majority of our families want the kids to come back. It seems that right now they prefer a hybrid model. I think because it looks at having fewer kids in a classroom at one time, which makes parents and families feel a little bit more secure about sending their kids back. The vast majority of our staff have said that they will come back. I did make it clear on both surveys that responses were not locked down. We know that what happens in the next few weeks can impact people's decision making. So we're making our plans based on the best information that we have right now, but know that we might need to pivot, even if we have a plan that we are reopening in a hybrid model, that at any point it could suddenly be changed to a completely remote model. And so we're trying to plan so that we can shift very quickly between in-person, partially in-person, and fully remote protocols as this pandemic dictates that we should. So we really are trying to gather as much information as we can. One thing that I forgot to mention, and I forget the exact date, but I'll have it for Tuesday, is that we are going to have another town hall, virtual town hall meeting, so that people can give feedback on the plan, and that will be at the start of the public comment period. I forget right now exactly what date we scheduled that for. It may have been July 30th, but let me get the exact date on that Tuesday. And I think that is just about everything.
Okay, any members have any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Ty?
would ditto your admiration for and your thanks to the superintendent, who has, I'm sure that no superintendent ever expected that they had to put in the kind of work and deal with this type of problem. And so I'd like to give, on behalf of the whole school committee, a kind of add a girl to her. And to you also, Mr. Mayor. Makes me very proud to see the leadership that you have provided. And the two of you working together, I know we're in good hands. So thanks very much for giving us your good brain, your good heart, and your good intentions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Ty.
I think Mrs. Rizzo had her hand up too.
Mrs. Rizzo?
Yes, thank you for everyone and anyone who has done anything to make this last 3 or 4 months a little bit easier for everyone else. And the work that the mayor and the superintendent had to do exemplary. Diane, as far as the opening, reopening, is there any way you can send us at least some bullet points of what might be happening so we have an idea before your public meeting?
Oh, yes, I will. As soon as the draft is done on the 22nd, I can get that to you.
Okay, sounds
I can get
good.
you the bullet points, and then the writer will convert it into more of a plan.
Yeah.
Which I can get you on the 28th, and then the public meeting would be on
The 4th?
I think I did the 30th for the public meeting. I can't remember, to be honest.
Okay.
I can't
I
get
think-
into my.
The
calendar.
fourth-
Okay, as long as we can have something to, kind of have an idea of what's going on.
Mhm, Absolutely.
I'm just, such mixed emotions, I'm sure everyone does, about how to open because how fluid everything has been. I know Framingham just put theirs out. They are having all teachers attend school, which I think is a great idea, but they're also waiting to, they're going to do remote learning until October, I believe. And I think once you have community input, people will be more comfortable with us opening.
Mhm.
Okay, any other members? Seeing no further business before the committee, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I
So
move that
moved.
we adjourn until Tuesday, July 21st
So moved.
Second.
Have a great
at 5 PM.
afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You too.